You are looking down into a hole in the Texas Hill Country that has swallowed at least 8 divers, and not one of them saw the thing that killed them coming. The water is so clear it looks gentle. That is the first lie this place tells you. I came to this story certain. It was simple, careless people, bad air, the ordinary cruel math of a dangerous hobby. I was sure I could explain every death on the list. Then I read the sonar maps. Stay with me. Because there is a depth reading from the 4th chamber, 137 feet down, that I could not explain no matter how many times I tried. I will give you every reasonable explanation for Jacob's Well, and you will watch each one come apart in your hands. Let me start where I started, with the easy answer, because I believed it. Jacob's Well sits just outside Wimberley, Texas, in Hayes County, near 30 degrees north and 98 degrees west. On the surface, it is a near-perfect circle, about 12 feet across, set into the bed of Cypress Creek. For more than a century, people have swung out on ropes and dropped into it like it was a swimming hole, because that is exactly what it looks like. It is an artesian spring fed by the Trinity Aquifer, and in a good year, it pushes thousands of gallons a minute up out of the rock and into the creek. Clear, cold, beautiful. The most photographed swimming spot in Central Texas. My first conclusion was almost lazy. People drown in pretty water all the time. That is not a mystery. That is a Tuesday. I remember the exact moment that conviction cracked. It was close to 2 in the morning, and I was reading an old recovery account from a diver named Don Dibble, who ran a dive shop and spent years pulling bodies out of that well. He described the way the shaft does not go straight down, it bends, it narrows, and he wrote about the silt, how a single careless fin kick turns clear water into total blackout in seconds. I sat there thinking, that is not a swimming hole. That is a machine built to kill the people who underestimate it. And the people it kills are almost always experienced. So here is the first reasonable explanation, the one any sensible person reaches for. These were diving accidents. Divers run out of air, they panic, they make mistakes, and a deep spring punishes mistakes harder than open water. Clean, rational, no need for anything stranger. I wanted that to be the whole story, but the geometry will not let you keep it. Jacob's Well is not a pit, it is a throat. It descends through a series of chambers, each one a separate trap with its own personality. The first chamber drops straight down to about 30 feet, wide and bright, and that part really is as safe as it looks. Then the floor of that chamber opens into a tight slot, and you pass into the second chamber, which angles down to roughly 55 feet. At the bottom of the second chamber, there is a constriction so narrow that a diver in full gear has to turn sideways and push through, and on the other side waits the third chamber, and then a fourth, where the recorded depths reach past 120 feet and, in places, down toward that 137-foot reading that has never left my head. Each chamber is a door, and every door is harder to find on the way back than it was on the way down. That is the part that broke the simple story for me. In open water, when something goes wrong, you go up. Up is always there. Up is safe. In Jacob's Well, up is a maze. You can be 20 feet from the surface and completely sealed inside the rock, hunting for a gap the width of your shoulders while your air gauge falls, and the silt you stirred turns the world the color of wet cement. These were not people who panicked in deep water. Some of them died with air still in their tanks. They died because they could not find the door, and that detail, the air still in the tanks, is where my tidy explanation died for good. If you are the kind of person who needs to hold every thread of a story like this all the way down to where it stops making sense, there is a book I have to put in front of you right now. It is called Forbidden Cartography, and it sits alongside 2 companion volumes, Beneath the Veil and Sealed Depths, and together they go exactly where this channel goes, into the places that resisted every clean explanation I brought to them. You will find them in the description below. If this investigation is the kind that keeps you up, those books are the longer version of that same feeling. So the geometry holds up, the part the easy answer cannot. This place does not kill you by being deep. It kills you by being clever. If not careless accidents, then what made it this lethal? That question pulled me straight into the second explanation, and I will be honest, I thought this one was airtight. The legends. Everyone around Wimberley will tell you Jacob's Well is bottomless. They will tell you it goes down forever, that it connects to caverns no one has ever mapped, that things go in and never come out. And my skeptical reflex fired immediately because every old swimming hole on Earth has a bottomless legend attached to it. It is the single most common piece of folklore in the world. Kids dare each other, a story grows, a depth gets exaggerated at every retelling, and within a generation, a 40-foot spring is a doorway to the underworld. I have debunked a dozen of these. I was certain Jacob's Well was the 13th. Here is where someone, somewhere, decided the comfortable version was good enough, and that is the part that should make you angry, because the comfortable version got people killed. For decades, the official posture was that this was a known, charted, manageable site, a novelty, a place to cool off. The danger was treated as a personal problem, the fault of reckless divers, never a property of the well itself. That framing kept the rope swing busy and the tourists happy, and it meant that the people who went down to test the legend went down believing it had already been measured. It had not been measured. That is the thing that undid me. Serious cave divers, the kind with technical training and redundant systems, took on Jacob's Well in a structured effort, sometimes called the Jacob's Well Exploration Project, and what they brought back is not folklore. They mapped passages stretching far horizontally beyond the vertical chambers, thousands of feet of submerged tunnel branching off into the limestone, parts of it so tight and so unstable that they had to lay guideline through silt that erased the way out behind them. The system is far larger than the pretty blue circle on the surface ever suggested. The legend said bottomless, and I came to mock the word. The maps did not give me my mockery back. They gave me something worse. They gave me extent without end, because here is the detail that turned my stomach. In the fourth chamber, there is what divers call a false floor, a bed of fine gravel and sediment that looks, on camera, like the bottom. Solid ground, the end of the descent, and for years people assumed that was it, but the divers who studied it closely noticed something that I keep coming back to in the dark. The gravel is not at rest. Water moves through it, it shifts, material disappears downward into the rock below, into passages too narrow for any human body, carried by a current coming from somewhere deeper that no one has ever reached. The floor of Jacob's Well is not a floor, it is a filter, and the thing on the far side of that filter has never been seen, so the bottomless legend was wrong only in its language. The well is not infinitely deep, it is something more unsettling. It is the visible mouth of a system that keeps going past the limit of where a human being can physically exist. You cannot reach the bottom, not because there isn't one, but because the passage shrinks until it will accept water and gravel and bone and refuse you. Folklore made it sound magical. The truth is just geology, and the geology is the scariest thing in this entire story. Which forced me to the third explanation, the one about the cameras, the one in the title that probably made you click, and the one I was most determined to tear apart. When people say the cameras at the bottom of Jacob's Well captured something horrifying, my instinct is to roll my eyes, and I am guessing yours is too. Underwater footage in a silty cave is the perfect breeding ground for nonsense. The light is bad. The water is full of suspended particles that look like snow, like shapes, like faces. The human brain is a pattern machine that will hand you a monster out of 3 gray smudges and a shadow. I have watched hours of murky dive footage that strangers swore showed a creature, and every single time it was a rock, a fish, or a fold of sediment. So when I sat down with the Jacob's Well material, I expected to do what I always do, explain the ghost away. And I could explain some of it. The drifting pale shapes, yes, those are real particulates, and they will haunt you if you want them to. The sense of something watching, that is the cave itself. The way a tight, dark space loads your nervous system until every instinct screams that you are not alone. I accounted for all of that. I was feeling pretty good. I was the reasonable man again. Then I got to what the cameras actually documented in the lower chambers, and being the reasonable man stopped helping me. The footage and the recovery records describe equipment down there. Tanks, fins, pieces of gear scattered through the deeper passages, some of it from divers whose bodies were eventually brought up some of it from the years when recovery was considered too dangerous to even attempt. There was a long stretch where going after a body in the fourth chamber was viewed as a way to simply add a second corpse to the first. Think about what that means. There were people down there that the surface had decided to stop trying to retrieve. The cameras did not find a monster. They found the abandoned dead and the things they were wearing when the well took them, lit up for a moment in the lamp beam and then gone again as the silt closed in. That is more frightening than any creature because it is real and it has names, and the names are on a memorial. But the part that genuinely changed how I sleep is not the gear, and it is not the remains. It is what the divers and the imaging picked up about the movement of the water itself. The lower system breathes, flow surges and slackens. During wet years, the spring pushes up hard, and during the worst droughts, it does something it was never supposed to do at all. It stops, and when it stops, that gentle upward pressure that has been holding the whole fragile architecture of gravel and silt in place is suddenly gone, and the false floor, the filter, becomes exactly as unstable as it always secretly was. Divers have described the difference between descending into an outflowing well and a still one as the difference between swimming up a river and dropping into a grave. When the flow reverses or dies, the well can pull instead of push. And I could not find a clean way to explain away a body of water that changes without warning from a fountain into a drain. Now I have to stop and say the thing I did not want to say, because you came here for a strange story about a faraway hole in the ground, and you probably assumed it had nothing to do with you. That is precisely the assumption I want to take out of your hands, because the moment I understood this part, the distance between Jacob's Well and my own kitchen sink collapsed completely. The water that comes up through Jacob's Well is not isolated. It is the Trinity Aquifer, the same groundwater system that tens of thousands of people across that region of Texas drink, bathe in, and pour into their children's glasses every single day. The well is a window into that aquifer. It is the visible, measurable pulse of a hidden body of water that an entire population depends on without ever thinking about it. And here is the fact that I keep setting in front of people who tell me this is just a spooky cave. For most of recorded history, Jacob's Well flowed without stopping. It was, as far as anyone knew, eternal. The first time it is documented to have completely stopped flowing was in the year 2000. Then it happened again in 2008. Then, in the brutal droughts of the past few years, it has gone still and dropped to a trickle more than once, and each time it recovers a little less convincingly than the time before. Sit with that. A spring that ran continuously through every drought the early settlers ever recorded, through dust bowls and decades, has now stopped multiple times inside a single human lifetime. The reasonable explanation is drought, and that is true, but it is not comforting, because it is only half the cause. The other half is us. Population growth, wells drilled into the same aquifer, water pumped out upstream faster than the rock can replenish it. The well is not failing on its own. It is being emptied from the same source we are all drinking from. That horrifying hole in the ground is a gauge, and the needle is dropping, and it is measuring the exact reservoir your tap would draw from if you lived there. The thing at the bottom of Jacob's Well is not a creature. It is a warning, and it has our fingerprints on it. That was the moment my skepticism stopped being a shield and started being a problem. Because I had walked in wanting to prove that a famous, dangerous well was just a famous, dangerous well, and instead every layer I peeled back connected the dread to something larger and closer. The deaths were not careless. The legend was not exaggerated, only mistranslated. The footage was not imagination. And the place itself is wired directly into the survival of everyone living above it. I had no easy answers left. I had one thread I had not pulled, and it is the thread that finally finished me. This is the part I found late, the part that does not show up in the tourist pages or the summer swimming articles, and it is the reason I made this at all. Investigators studying where the water comes from and where it goes use dye tracing, releasing tracked dye into the system and watching for where it reappears to understand the underground plumbing of the Wimberley area. The results are quietly staggering. The water moving through these hill country cave systems can travel for miles underground through passages no person will ever enter, emerging at springs far from where it vanished, on timelines that reveal just how vast and interconnected the hidden network beneath Central Texas really is. Jacob's Well is not a single well at all. It is one opening, one throat, in an enormous flooded labyrinth threaded through the limestone, most of which is permanently beyond human reach. The chambers we can dive, the building goes on for miles, and it is full of water, and it is dark, and it has been there longer than our species, and now the reading, 137 feet. That figure, recorded in the deepest accessible part of the system, is not the bottom. I need you to understand that, because I did not understand it at first, and when I finally did, it was the single most unsettling realization of this entire investigation. 137 feet is simply the depth at which a trained human being, breathing carefully, managed gas, carrying redundant equipment, with a guideline and a team, has to stop. It is the depth of our limit, not the depth of the well. Below that point, the gravel keeps swallowing, the current keeps coming from below, and the passage keeps going into spaces that have never held a light and never will. The well does not end at 137 feet. We end there. The well keeps going without us. That is the fact that defeated me, and I want to be precise about why, because I am still, at heart, the skeptic who walked in. Every dangerous place I have ever investigated had an edge, a floor, a measured worst case, a number where the danger stopped and the rock began. You could stand at the bottom of it, even a terrible bottom, and say, this is as bad as it gets. Jacob's Well has no such number. The men who died in the fourth chamber did not die at the bottom. They died partway down a descent that has no documented end, in a system that exhales when it is healthy and inhales when it is dying, attached to an aquifer that is now stopping for the first time in human memory. There is no floor to stand on, literally or in any other sense. There is only the gravel that shifts, and the dark current underneath it coming up out of a place we have never seen and cannot survive. I tried to explain that away for weeks. Careless divers, I disproved it with air still in their tanks, exaggerated legend. I disproved it with thousands of feet of map tunnel and a false floor that eats stone, tricks of the camera in silty water. I disproved it with named bodies the surface gave up on, and a spring that reverses from fountain to drain. Every reasonable door I opened led to a smaller, darker room, and the last room has no far wall. That is the honest end of my investigation. Not a monster. Not a ghost. Something quieter and far harder to sleep beside. A hole in the ground that has never been measured to its end, that kills the experienced and spares the casual, that is plugged into the water of a living region, and that has begun, in our lifetime, to run dry from the bottom up. So here is what I am left holding, and I will hand it straight to you. I went to Jacob's Well to prove that fear is a failure of information, that if you just gather enough facts, the dread evaporates. I gathered the facts, the dread got worse, and it got specific, and it got true. That is the rarest and most disturbing kind of fear there is, the kind that grows stronger the more you learn instead of weaker. If you are still here, you are the kind of person I actually trust, the kind who wants the chill and the receipts in the same hand, who will not accept a lazy answer just because it lets you close the tab and feel safe. So tell me where my skepticism should have held. Was it the divers with air left in their tanks, the gravel floor that swallows stone, the spring that stopped for the first time in the year 2000, or that depth reading that turned out to be our limit and not the wells? Tell me which explanation you walked in believing, and which one was the last to fall, and do me the favor of actually typing it, because this is not a channel that talks to an empty room. It is a room full of people who refuse to take the official version on faith. Leave a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching this from, because I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled from that 12-foot circle in the Texas creek bed. And if you are the sort who would rather test the easy story than swallow it, stay with me, because the next place I am taking you is a flooded shaft on the other side of the world where the dye trace came back showing water moving in a direction that, by every rule of geology we are taught, it should not be able to go. I could not explain that one either. I think you already know what that means about me by now. The well keeps going without us. The least we can do is keep looking. Let me leave you with the thing I genuinely could not put down, the detail that follows me out of the office and into ordinary daylight. When the divers laid their guideline through the deepest accessible passages, they were not just mapping rock, they were marking the exact boundary of where we are allowed to exist, and that boundary moves. In a wet year, the flow is strong enough that a diver can hover in the fourth chamber and feel the well actively pushing back, holding the silt down, keeping the way out open. In a dry year, that same chamber goes slack and treacherous, and the line that saved a life last season might lead this season into a passage already collapsing behind the people who follow it. The map of safety is rewritten by rainfall hundreds of miles away. Think about how strange that is. The thing deciding whether you live or die at 137 feet is not your training or your courage. It is whether enough rain fell on the hill country 2 years ago to keep the aquifer breathing. That is what undid the last of my certainty. I am used to danger that stays where you left it. Jacob's well is a danger that changes its shape according to forces no diver can see, measure in the moment, or argue with. The well is not waiting for you at the bottom. It is deciding, while you descend, who you get to be. I came certain I could explain every death on that list. I couldn't. So for those still with me inside the circle, I keep going right where this video stopped, the chamber by chamber map. I couldn't fit here. In there, you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You're never doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code. Cancel anytime with one click. If this mystery left you wanting more, stay with me. Subscribe and keep exploring. There are many more strange, unsettling discoveries waiting for you right here, and we are just getting started.